Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We're delighted you took time to join us. Russia has taken the lead in the Syrian crisis as the U.S. and Russian officials work toward a diplomatic solution in Syria. The Russian president has penned a provocative op-ed in the New York Times. Best-selling author and former advisor to 3 presidents, Patrick J. Buchanan, is here to break it down for us and take your questions live. And this week marked the 12th anniversary of 9/11 and the 1-year anniversary of the Benghazi tragedy. Congressman Sean Duffy is here to talk about his efforts to honor the Navy SEALs who were killed, as well as discuss the looming budget battle in Congress. And finally, a story of faith, healing, and hope. A remarkable young man beating the odds to overcome stage 4 cancer. He'll share his story and the Pope who helped him along the way. We'll also celebrate our 17th anniversary with you a little later in the broadcast. Now, if you have a question for Pat Buchanan, give us a call live. 1-800-221-9460 is the number, or internationally, 205-271-2980. You can tweet me at Raymond Arroyo, or you can drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Now here's the brief. News from the world over this week. President Obama's threatened military strike over the use of chemical weapons in Syria is on hold as Russia and the U.S. began high-level conversations in Geneva. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are working on a plan to get the Assad regime to hand over its chemical weapons. The U.S. hopes to emerge from the meeting with specifics on how to secure, inventory, and then destroy more than 1,000 tons of chemical weapon stockpiles. All of this will have to take place within an active civil war. Secretary Kerry hopes the plan will be part of a binding UN Security Council resolution currently being negotiated. Then, just before the meeting, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned the United States against any plans for military action. In a bold New York Times op-ed piece published Wednesday, Putin says that a strike by the U.S. could create more victims and could spread the conflict beyond Syria. He further criticized the U.S. for advancing a foreign policy based on what he called brute force and intimidation. We'll discuss all of that with Pat Buchanan in our next segment. Back in Syria, an update on a story from last week, the battle over the Christian town of Malula, where Aramaic, the language Christ spoke, is still spoken. It has taken center stage. Fighting continues there between rebels and the Assad military. Rebel forces, including al-Qaeda elements, had overrun the ancient city just outside Damascus last Thursday. But on Sunday, state-run Syrian TV declared that the Assad forces had routed the rebels, expelling them from the city. That report could not be confirmed, and the fighting continues. At a church in Damascus on Tuesday, 3 cousins were laid to rest, reportedly killed, after attempting to flee Malula fighting. The mourners alleged that the men were killed by fighters from an al-Qaeda-linked affiliate. 2 had their throats slit, another was shot. Most of Malula's 2,000 Christians have already fled the region, but the rebel insurgents there has stoked fears that the defeat of the Assad regime will mark the end of a Christian presence in Syria. One mourner summed up the concerns of Christians both now and in the event of a rebel victory.
Christians are not comfortable here. They are scared, they are not protected, they want to kill us.
Meanwhile, rebels within Malula went on a PR offensive to assuage Christian concerns. This video, posted on YouTube, shows a rebel leader outside the city's ancient church ordering his fighters not to harm any sacred structure. He continues proclaiming, "These people are our families." These icons of the church and those people here and there, they should stay in peace. The Washington Post reported that over the weekend, the extremist rebels visited the last remaining Christians in Malula, 24 nuns in a convent caring for 24 orphans. They asked the nuns to record this video message saying that they have not been harmed. Artillery fire can be clearly heard at close range as the rebels and nuns converse. The Post confirmed that the sisters were in fact not harmed. Please keep them and all the people of the Middle East in your prayers. Meanwhile, the persecution of Christians in Egypt continues. The Upper Nile city of Dalga has been held under siege by Muslim Brotherhood militants since July 3rd ouster, the July 3rd ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. Christians there continue to report that homes, businesses, and churches are under attack. All 4 churches in the city have been ransacked, sustaining heavy damages. Public masses were canceled for all of August. A mass was eventually held this past week. Just 25 people attended due to security concerns. And now, according to multiple reports, the city's 20,000 Christians are being ordered to pay the so-called submission tax, or the jizya. The tax applies to non-Muslims who refuse to convert to Islam. And halfway around the world, in southern Philippines, government troops are battling Muslim militants there as well. On Monday, an Islamist separatist group sieged the port town of Zamboanga. They killed 6, took hundreds of hostages, and forced the evacuation of another 15,000 people in the majority Christian city. A standoff has ensued as militants used hostages as human shields. The crisis has virtually paralyzed the city. Most flights and ferry services have been suspended. And I'm dubbing this next segment my cleanup portion of the program. The media is reporting that Pope Francis announced that atheists are going to heaven so long as they follow their conscience. Confusion is stemming from an open letter the Pope wrote to a famous non-believer published in an Italian newspaper. In part, the Pope's letter read that even for non-believers, quote, God's mercy has no limits if you go to him with a sincere and contrite heart. He went on to make a separate point that non-believers should obey their conscience, since obeying one's conscience means making, quote, decisions in relation to what is perceived as good and bad. And on that decision rests the goodness or evil of our actions, end quote. That's all. The Independent of London, as an example of a misguided headline, took the Holy Father's statement to mean, quote, Pope Francis assures atheists you don't have to believe in God to go to heaven. MSN's headline was a bit more accurate. It read, Pope says God will have mercy on atheists if they're not jerks. Okay. Meanwhile, the Vatican's new Secretary of State received his secular christening this week. In an interview with a Venezuelan daily, Archbishop Pietro Parolin noted the difference between dogma and discipline. He went on to say that dogmas were fixed, but the Church could reconsider a discipline such as priestly celibacy. Well, on Wednesday, the New York Post enthused in its headline, Vatican leader open to talks on priests having sex. The Post is a little late to the game. The fact is, the eastern part of the Catholic Church has always had married priests, and the Anglican ordinariates established by Pope Benedict also allows married clergy. What the Vatican Secretary of State said is hardly news. Celibacy is a discipline in the Latin Rite, the Western Church, and yes, it can be changed, but thus far, there are no announced plans to do so. When we return, can Russia be trusted to secure Syria's chemical weapons? And has the U.S. lost face and credibility during the Syrian imbroglio? Pat Buchanan joins us to discuss when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. A U.S. strike on Syria seems to have been averted for the moment, thanks to an unlikely diplomatic move by Russian President Vladimir Putin this week. But what does this Russian involvement mean to the U.S. influence on the world? And what impact did the Pope's day of prayer and fasting have on the situation? To enlighten us is syndicated columnist, former presidential candidate, and author of the, I guess you could call it a prophetic book, Suicide of a Superpower. Would you welcome Pat J. Buchanan back to the show?
Raymond, good to see you
Great
again.
to see you, my friend.
Right.
Let's start with this Putin letter.
Right.
This guy, you got to give him credit for being brassy and bold.
He'd be a great syndicated columnist.
Don't you think?
Pick him up right now.
Well, they say he wrote this himself.
Look at the reaction he got to it in his first column.
Yeah, you see that? He writes in the New York Times, and look what happens. We'll put it up on the screen. Here's an excerpt of that op-ed from today. From the outset, Putin writes, Russia has advocated peaceful dialogue enabling Syrians to develop a compromise plan for their own future. We are not protecting the Syrian government, Putin writes, but international law. We need to use the United Nations Security Council under current international law. Force is permitted only in self-defense or by the decision of the Security Council. Anything else is unacceptable under the United Nations Charter and would constitute an act of aggression. What is the impact of that letter on these delicate negotiations between the U.S. and Russia now?
What he's saying is, Mr. President, your Congress has not given you the authority to go to war in Syria, and neither am I in the Security Council. I will veto any resolution that authorizes the use of force. And I can't blame him. What is he doing? Now, Assad's regime and his father's regime are pretty brutal. Nixon established relations with him. George H.W. Bush made him allies in the Gulf War. But what Putin is doing and Russia is doing is supporting a presently legitimate government in Syria fighting against an insurrection and rebellion, which he has a right to do, but he is right on international law. I mean, the United States, if it's not acting in its own self-defense or it doesn't have a UN Security Council resolution, has no authority to go to war.
But it's a little, it's really, it's hard. The straight face test is barely passed when Vladimir Putin's accusing the United States of brute force and intimidation. Pat, the guy was a KGB agent.
He was a KGB agent, and you take a look at what he did in Chechnya, the overwhelming brutality of that was horrible and appalling. He's a rough, tough, ruthless customer, but this was a very effective letter in my judgment.
Pat, you called him a statesman. You thought this was statesmanlike.
I think his position in the last 2 weeks has been statesmanlike in this sense, Raymond. He has stopped cold the American drive to an insane war in Syria, which Putin is right would rapidly expand. The Iranians and the Russians would provide weapons to make up for what the Syrians lost. I think this would spill over. The number of casualties, dead and wounded, and refugees would increase. The war would go on longer and longer. And he is right about the character and composition of part of the rebel force. They are terrorists. They're the ones doing what they're doing in Malula. And the why are we providing weapons to rebels who want to overthrow the government and destroy the army that is trying to protect Malula?
And the CIA has already made these weapon drops. We have reports that that's already underway.
This is what the President Obama and Kerry's policy is incoherent. They say we want this strike, military strike, to be so unbelievably small, this is Kerry, that it cannot overturn the regime in Damascus. We don't want to overturn it. Why? Because we're afraid of al-Qaeda.
Right.
Why then are we giving weapons to the rebels who want to overturn the regime?
No, we're on all sides of this thing, and we're offending all parties, which is a real problem.
Well, look, the American people don't want the war. The U.S. military, they take polls of them, 80% don't want the war. The Congress right there does not want the war. In his heart, Barack Obama doesn't want this war. He got himself out on a limb with his silly, ultimatum, Assad must go, you better not cross my red lines. But he had no authority and no power to enforce it.
I want to read you one more excerpt from this Putin op-ed and get the reaction of the venerable columnist. I would rather disagree, Putin wrote, with a case he, Obama, made on American exceptionalism, stating that the United States policy is what makes America different. It's what makes us exceptional. It is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation, Putin writes. There are big countries and small countries, rich and poor, those with long democratic traditions and those still finding their way to democracy. Their policies differ too. We are all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. Your thoughts?
This is very moving.
It's like a sermon.
It's like a sermon, but I will say this. I mean, the United States we do claim we're an exceptional age. He says we do it because of our policy. Those of us who believe and love this country and believe it's, frankly, divinely inspired and the greatest and best country on earth, despite its failings and sins, I don't think we do so because we think the quality of our present leadership is to me, it's pretty pedestrian in terms of its quality. But I do agree with his fundamental point that, look, Madeleine Albright said in the 1990s, we are the indispensable nation. We see further than others. I mean, you hear that in Great Britain and France and all over the world and China, all over the world. There's a real recoil and reaction to it. And I do think there is a braggadocio and an arrogance to American foreign policy. And I will say Mr. Bush, when he got up there and said, those who are not with us are against us in going to war. What does that say about John Paul II,
Yeah.
You say,
and it should be said,
right?
Pat Buchanan and Bob Novak of happy memory were opposed
Prince
to
of
the
Darkness.
Prince of Darkness, who was really ended up being a Duke of Light.
A good human being.
He and you opposed that insurrection into Iraq when it was going on, and you were ridiculed and scorned all over this town. You have the same position on this incursion into Syria. Is it for the same reason?
Similar reasons. Let me say this. The difference is Novak and I, when we were out there opposing the war in Iraq, we said, we're going to crush the Iraqis, but down the road this is going to turn into a disaster when we occupy them, given their different religion, culture, and all the rest of it. Don't do this. And we wound up with, 4,500 dead, 35,000 wounded warriors, and $1 trillion gone, and the place has fallen apart. This time, though, I will say, Raymond, what they call me an isolationist. It's not true, but the anti-interventionist, the anti-war movement in the Republican Party and in this nation is now dominant. It is now the neocons and their crowd who desperately want war, the McCainiacs and all the rest. They are the ones in the minority now pushing for this war. But let me tell the folks out there, we've stopped, I think, this war temporarily on Syria. But what is coming is a drive for war with Iran.
You think that's the backdrop? This is the predicate to that?
Syria is the back door to war on Iran. Dress rehearsal.
Before we get to the president's speech, I want to touch on this. We covered this 5-hour-long prayer vigil, a day of prayer and fasting that the Pope called for. The chief rabbi of Rome joined him. The Grand Mufti in Syria joined him. Rick Warren joined him. People of all faiths for this day. How much do you credit that day of prayer and fasting for the odd turn of events we've seen just this week?
Well, I think, I'm certain that had an effect on Barack Obama because it reaches, I think his inner core is, he's not a war president. I mean, as I've written, his diffidence, his indecisiveness, he makes Adlai Stevenson look like Stonewall Jackson. And I don't think he wants this war in his heart, and he realizes he crawled out on a limb with these foolish statements. And frankly, he rescued himself first by saying, I have to go to the Congress and get approval now. The second thing that rescued him was Vladimir Putin, who came forward after Kerry made yet another gaffe, and he says, that's an outstanding offer you've got there, Secretary Kerry. We'll follow up on it. So to me, I'm elated with it. Look, are the Russians playing us? Are the Russians going to milk this
thing? Can they be trusted to secure these weapons?
They can be trusted in this sense. If it's in the Russians' interest, they will do what is there. And it is in their interest to get these poison gas weapons out of Syria and not let them fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda and these other terrorists, because otherwise those weapons will wind up in Dagestan and Ingushetia and Chechnya in the North Caucasus. Putin knows that. Look, Putin detests these people. They've bombed Moscow repeatedly. He's the one that called up and said, look, the Sarnoff brothers, I mean, they're bad actors, fellas. You better keep an eye on them.
I want to share a bite with you from the president. This is from the speech this week about evidence, about the evidence and the justification for a military strike in Syria. Listen to this. You as well.
On August 21st, when Assad's government gassed to death over 1,000 people, including hundreds of children. The images from this massacre are sickening. Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas, others foaming at the mouth, gasping for breath. A father clutching his dead children, imploring them to get up and walk. On that terrible night, the world saw in gruesome detail the terrible nature of chemical weapons and why the overwhelming majority of humanity has declared them off limits.
Well, there he is, making this emotional argument for this military intervention. Did that wash? Does it wash?
Well, his description is exact. They're horrible. They've been outlawed for a good reason. But therefore, because the Syrian army did this, he has not produced evidence that Assad ordered it. In this country, you don't hang a man, put him to death for murder unless you prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. If Assad ordered this, then let's see the evidence. Secondly, Raymond, how do we invalidate or turn around what happened to those children by firing 50 or 100 cruise missiles and killing 1,000 Syrians? How many Syrians must we kill in order to make us feel good about ourselves that we stood up and really blasted Assad? We're not going after him again. Obama says, we don't want to take down the regime. We don't want regime change, but we're going to have to kill a lot of Syrians and destroy their weaponry, which enables the rebels, strengthens them, and as John McCain says, changes the battlefield so it moves toward a victory for the people who are doing what they're doing to Maaloula. It does not make sense. What makes sense?
This is going to do to Syria what we've seen the Christian community subject to in Iraq, which is obliteration.
What it's going to be is massive martyrdoms of Christians in Syria, because these are devils. These people over there that are doing what they're doing to Maaloula, going in there, telling people to convert, cutting their throats and things. These are people who are embedded with and around the new Syrian army, and we are equipping the new Syrian army to kill the army that is defending Maaloula.
It's unbelievable. The justification the president also invoked was, we are defending human dignity, human worth here. Right. I mean, there are occasions of human worth and dignity being offended all over the world. Sudan, China, North Korea. We could go down. Are we going to send Scud missiles into all of these countries?
Send them into Zimbabwe.
Yeah, exactly. Or Nigeria. We report every week. We report on Nigeria.
Boko Haram, that crowd up there. But and this is another point Putin made in his wonderful op-ed.
I think you're going to start syndicating it, Pat.
No, but he made a good point. He said, you all went into Libya and you tore up, you killed Gaddafi as a result, and you got rid of his regime. And what happened? His weapons and the terrorists moved into Mali immediately. And they're moving into Nigeria. They're spreading, Al-Qaeda is spreading out all over the region. I don't like these dictators. They're deplorable, detestable people. But you go down and you blow up their regime and destroy it, and all the creatures, it's not simply the good people that rise up then, all the noxious elements they were holding down come to the surface.
Yeah. And we've seen this as this Arab Spring has played out. You wrote not long ago that there are three elements to the Arab Spring that have been sort of unleashed: tribalism, nationalism, and Islamism. Tell us about that and the ultimate effect. What do you see looking at the history of this? And I know you are such not only a chronicler of history, but a student of it.
Hilaire Belloc beat me by 75 years on what would happen there. But this is exactly. If you go with one man, one vote democracy, what you're going to do is then the forces are going to come up and they're going to be represented in your government roughly in the proportion of the population. The driving force across, as Belloc pointed out, he said Islam is going to awaken and it's going to rise, and it's going to threaten the West as it's not done for hundreds of years. That has exactly happened. Secondly, you've got these issues of tribalism. We see them at work in Yemen and Libya especially, but they're happening in not only Sunni and Shia in Iraq, but Kurds are rising up. You see it in Afghanistan,
right.
Hazara, Uzbekistan, Turks, all these, Uzbeks and Turkmenistan people, and the Pashtun, and they're all warring with each other. So to the degree that you wipe out all these regimes, all these fundamental basic forces, Islamic fundamentalism, tribalism, ethno-nationalism rise to the surface, and they're going to break all these countries apart. And we ought to know what we're doing before we blast some of these regimes off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
What's underneath?
Yeah. How long before King Abdullah falls and the Saudis, who are supposedly the allies? We want to talk about human rights offenses,
exactly.
religious persecution. Look at the Saudis.
Try converting to Catholicism in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, good luck.
I mean, look, they'll cut your head off over there.
No,
that's exactly right. But the Saudis this is part of the Sunni-Shia conflict that is really coming. And one Saudi cleric astonished me. He had a statement. He said, 100 million Shia cannot withstand 1.7 billion Sunni. And he makes a point. I think the Shia, as the Alawite or Shia, are the minority in terms of numbers. Al-Qaeda and all the Caliphate people, they are Sunnis.
Yeah.
Why are we on their side in Syria?
No, it's remarkable. It's a misreading of the cultural landscape, but we've seen this again and again in Iraq, now in Syria, in Egypt, and you just...
Libya, it's all over the place, yeah.
You
and
look
you see
at
it in,
you shake your head.
And you see it where the Muslims and Christian line across, what is it, 16th parallel in Africa? Right across it. What is happening to the Christians in all these areas?
It's a tragedy.
It's called, Islam has bloody borders, as Huntington said.
The Arab winter, Pat. The Arab winter. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll come
America.
back. All right. Very good. Pat Buchanan is working on another major book right now, a Nixon memoir, right?
Rehabilitation of Richard Nixon.
Rehabilitation. All right. But his most recent book, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive Till 2025, is still available at bookstores everywhere. Seems like we're reading it in the headlines. When we return, Congressman Sean Duffy will be here to talk about a possible government shutdown over the defunding of Obamacare and what should be done about Benghazi a year later. And our 17th anniversary celebration is straight ahead. The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Congress faces a major deadline at the end of September, mainly funding the government. Republicans are divided over how to proceed and whether they should shut down the government to delay the implementation or funding of Obamacare. Joining me now is a member of the House Budget Committee representing the 7th District of Wisconsin, Congressman Sean Duffy. Sean, thanks for being here.
Raymond, thanks for having me on.
Now,
good to be here.
Let's start with this division, if you will, in the Republican ranks and certainly amid Democratic members over whether to move forward with the funding of government. It extinguishes on September 30th. There was a proposal to extend what's called a continuing resolution, a defined spending bill that would have taken this to December. What happened? Why is there so much angst over this?
Well, so first of all, no one disputes the fact that we should fund the government after the end of this month with this continuing resolution, the CR. There's a debate about at what level. So you know about sequester. There's a reduction in spending. It's been a little bit painful.
Across the board.
Across the board. We as Republicans can come together and say, let's pass this CR at the sequester level. There's no disagreement about that. What we're discussing is whether we fund Obamacare within the CR. Many of us believe that Obamacare is not good for America. It's going to reduce access to health care. It's going to increase the cost of health care. We think it is bad for America, empowering bureaucrats in Washington to make health care decisions when those should be left within the families of America. So we want to do everything we can to make sure we delay it, stall it, defund it, and that's been an effort and a conversation in the House of Representatives. We get a hard time. People say, you've tried to do this 40 times.
Right. I mean, you've tried to knock the bill down. It doesn't move past the House chamber.
But we have to be clear on how the government is functioning as well. This is divided government. So if you want to have a defund Obamacare legislation pass and become law, you don't just need the House. You need Harry Reid and Democrats in the Senate on board, and then you need the president to actually sign that bill. So in divided government, when Obamacare is the law, it becomes very challenging to actually defund it.
All right.
So that's when we come to this conversation. Well,
so why attempt to defund it?
Well, some believe that if we actually try to defund it and hold to our guns, we shut the government down, and pressure will come to Harry Reid and the president to capitulate and roll over, and they'll join us. I've been to this rodeo before. I've only been here for 2.5 years, but in this rodeo, the media will blame the House Republicans.
Watch where you point that finger.
And I think it becomes very difficult for us to win that battle. But we have to be savvy and say, well, if we don't think we can have a strategy where we're going to be successful to defund, how can we find a strategy to actually delay it?
Okay. Your number 2 in your leadership, Eric Cantor, had a proposal. You have a spending resolution that would continue the funding of government and a separate amendment to defund Obamacare. What's wrong with that approach?
Well, listen, some of us in the House were okay with that. And what it does is it would have sent the defund portion over to the Senate. They vote on that first, up or down. So the Senate has to take a vote on Obamacare. Once they did, it would release the CR funding portion to go over to the Senate. Here's what's happening. You hear on the news.
They could smack the amendment down, and then the spending just goes forward. So why go through this exercise?
Well, so here's what there's a lot of senators that are Republican that are talking about defunding Obamacare and a potential shutdown. What we in the House say is that's great. Those senators should get a coalition of Republicans that can hold to a filibuster, and they can drive the Senate if Harry Reid was to modify our bill of sequester funding and defunding Obamacare. If they could hold a filibuster-proof Republican coalition, they could shut it down. What they're doing, Raymond, is they're trying to put the gun to the House and see if we'll do it. But the bottom line is we don't want the government to shut down. We want to do all we can to actually delay, stall, and push back Obamacare. It's bad for America. We don't have a concise strategy yet.
Because of the impact it would have on business. I mean, this thing has been changed. There was a Congressional Research Service report that Obamacare has been delayed or altered 19 times by the administration. That's not counting all the other offsets that then the waivers they've granted to so many companies and businesses. What happens if this goes through and Congress doesn't do something? We're talking it's going to be implemented very shortly.
It's going to have a real impact. I mean, we hear now, Raymond, there's a lot of businesses that are taking their full-time employees and they're moving them to part-time so they can get out of the grasp of Obamacare. I mean, this is having a real impact on American families who are already having a hard time paying their bills. Now they're getting stuck, instead of a full-time job, a part-time job. So I think you're going to see America not very happy when Obamacare is implemented. And listen, you have a group that's willing to fight for their constituents, fight for their American families, and fighting for them means getting rid of Obamacare. And so we're going to see what happens. We have a couple of weeks here before the end of the month.
Isn't it risky for the GOP to even attempt or threaten a shutdown, a government shutdown? Won't you be labeled as the guilty party if that happens?
Listen, we have to fight. We have to do everything we can to make sure we get rid of this legislation because it's so bad.
But is this spending bill the vehicle to do it?
Listen, we don't we don't want to shut down the government, but we want to get rid of Obamacare. We want to use whatever mechanism and
but
leverage
how can you do that in the Congress when you have a Democratic Senate and a president who this is his signature achievement?
So there's this sequester, right? That's this reduced spending that took place a couple years ago in the Budget Control Act.
Across the board cuts.
Across the board cuts.
People are still caterwauling about it, including the Pentagon.
It's not the best way to cut, but there are these spending reductions.
Right.
The president wants to spend money. The Democrats in the Senate, they want to spend. Nancy Pelosi, they want to spend.
So Paul Ryan has this plan. You delay implementation by a year. You take the money saved and you use that to offset some of the pain of these sequester cuts. Do you support that? You
can throw a little extra money into the pot so Democrats have some more spending for another year, and you get a year delay of Obamacare. The details of that still have to be worked out, but I think in a negotiation where you give the president and Harry Reid in the Senate, you give him something, and we get something in return, which is a delay. I think that's a potential where we can work, where both sides get something that they want.
And what are Democrats saying to you about that plan?
Listen, I think there's, well, everyone's playing hard to get here, Raymond. But I do think if you give them something, we can bring them to the negotiating table and we get something. Because listen, because as you mentioned, this is not, I mean, they're having trouble with the implementation of Obamacare. Even the unions are angry at it. To give them an excuse where they get something for it to delay, I think many of them could be happy.
Let's talk about Benghazi for a moment.
Absolutely.
I knew Susan Rice, National Security Advisor, came to you guys, offered you a classified briefing. Your reaction to that briefing by Susan Rice particularly?
Well, so earlier this week, that's right, we all came back, the Congress did, and got a briefing from an elite team from the president, from the White House. And the first person to kick off the briefing to sell us on why all the evidence exists and
About
why
Syria.
on Syria, yes, on Syria, that we should actually give the president authorization to use military force. The first one to sell us on that was Susan Rice. And if you remember, a year ago, after Benghazi, Susan Rice was the one who went on the morning talk shows and said this had nothing to do with 9/11. It had everything to do with a YouTube video of some guy, hidden Islam.
Yeah.
It was a lie. She knew it, and here she's the one coming to sell us on Benghazi. Listen,
On Syria.
I'm sorry, on Syria. If either the president is incompetent in trying to sell the House, or he's trying to poke a finger in our eye, because Susan Rice sold no Republicans in the House. Listen, this is the president wants to go on a war footing with Syria. I have a lot of common sense Americans in central and northern Wisconsin. They don't want to go to war. They see this as a civil war. They see Assad as a bad actor. They see radical Islam as the coalition fighting Assad. They see there's no winners for America. They don't want us to go in.
Yeah. Tell me about, you have a bill that you're proposing to acknowledge and give the nation's thanks to those 2 slain Navy SEALs who fought valiantly in the midst of this Benghazi terrorist attack. Tell us about these 2 men and why you decided to move this piece.
These are our 2 former Navy SEALs who were in Benghazi at the consulate.
Both deceased.
Both deceased. Both fought valiantly to the death, fighting the terrorists on 9/11 a little over a year ago in Benghazi. We want to recognize their valor, their service to their country, the patriots that they are. And so what we've done in the House is come forward, 43 of us, offering them the Congressional Gold Medal. It's the highest civilian award that we can offer, to recognize what they've done for our country, what they did in that fight in Benghazi a year ago. And we want to continue to build political support to make sure we recognize them, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, for the sacrifice they've made, the ultimate sacrifice. They gave their life as they fought that battle. They deserve that. And I know there's some who believe there's political consequences to talk about Benghazi and what happened. Listen, this rises above politics. These men deserve to be recognized for their honorable behavior. And we think the Congressional Gold Medal is what they deserve.
What's been the reaction of your colleagues?
Their support. We just have to build a little better recognition in the House, and maybe tonight being here, those who listen to your program will reach out to their congressman or woman and suggest that they get on this resolution to make sure that these men are recognized.
No, it's amazing. I mean, they held their posts while this was all collapsing around them, and they didn't abandon those posts, which is incredible.
They fought to the death.
And typical of the Navy SEALs and the men who are assigned to these outposts. Let's talk about the select committee that Congressman Frank Wolf has been begging the leadership for. A select committee to investigate what really happened 9/11 a year ago in Benghazi. Why the resistance to this? This would seem something so simple, and yet the Republican leadership, your leadership, is somehow not moving.
Now, Raymond, I can't tell you why the leadership won't sign on to this select committee. It doesn't make sense to me. I agree with Mr. Wolf.
He's got 169 plus co-sponsors of this bill.
The ball's not moving forward in regard to that investigation. And so when we're getting stonewalled, when we're getting stopped, I think it's time to go to a select committee to actually investigate what happened. America has a right to know what happened in Benghazi, to make sure it never happens again. We have a right to know what the administration did, what the response was. When you have men, American men on the ground fighting What did we do to send them aid? What did we do to send them help? The two brave men we just referenced, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, they had their laser positions on the mortars of the terrorists as those mortars were coming in, hoping that air cover was going to come over and do laser-guided missiles and take the terrorists out. They never came. We have a right to know, and I think this select committee is appropriate to really jumpstart this investigation.
Yeah, I still can't understand what the opposition is a year later. Frank Wolf has been on the floor all month, last month in August, raising awareness about this, and there doesn't seem to be movement. So
Speaker Boehner's a Catholic. Maybe we'll get him on the show.
Maybe Pope Francis needs a day of prayer and fasting for a select committee on Benghazi.
Absolutely.
Congressman Sean Duffy, thank you for being here. Now for something a bit more uplifting, with apologies to the Congressman. My next guest received some harrowing news as he neared his 17th birthday. A talented high school lacrosse player, standing at 6'6", he seemed the picture of health. But a persistent cough led his doctors to diagnose him with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. A devout Catholic, his faith and stamina were tested by the experience. But he joins us now in full remission to tell us how faith, family, and science, not to mention the fulfillment of a very special wish, all combined to help him beat the odds. Joining us now via satellite from Denver is Peter Srsich. Peter, thanks for being with us.
Of course.
Now, tell me, how did this diagnosis affect you? I can only imagine what a cancer diagnosis like this, the reaction you must have had spiritually and otherwise. Tell me about it.
Well, when I first heard it, I was a little bit scared, of course. I mean, I was confused. I had no idea what was about to happen to me. Really no idea what I was going to go through. First thing I thought was I was about to lose my senior year of high school. But I was able to kind of go back on my faith and be strengthened by that a little bit and go through it. And I tried to keep a smile on my face, if not for myself, for my family and friends.
And the tumor was in your chest, right, Pete?
Yes, the main tumor was in my chest, but it had spread through my lymph nodes a little bit.
Oh, boy.
And there were some smaller tumors on my adrenal glands.
But they couldn't operate. They were worried about operating because of what, the anesthesia?
Right, because of the size and location of the tumor. If they had put me under the anesthesia, there was a risk that I wouldn't be able to wake up, or if something went wrong, my windpipe would collapse and they wouldn't be able to do anything about that. So they couldn't actually go into surgery for even a biopsy.
Wow, unbelievable. And you had 7 rounds of chemo, 21 rounds of radiation. You must have really been depressed, I would imagine, in the midst of all this with the painkillers and everything else that you were on, in addition to the diagnosis sort of hanging over your head.
Well, you know, for the first 2 rounds of my chemo, the side effects were terrible, and I was on pretty heavy painkillers for both of those. And in the midst of that, I did face some pretty severe depression and kind of had almost given up even. And that was a really tough time for me for those first 2 rounds. But after my second round, one of my friends actually came in with the Eucharist. And I was sitting there, I had almost lost my faith entirely. And he came in with the Eucharist and he said the prayer, like, "This is the body of Christ." And right in that moment, I actually saw Jesus Christ with me in the room and felt his presence in a just very real way that I can't put into words.
Wow.
And from that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay and that I was going to be better and I could fight through it.
And you had a special wish. I know the Make-A-Wish Foundation came to you. What was your wish that was eventually granted? And what role did that play, do you think, in your recovery and during this very momentous time?
Well, my wish was to meet Pope Benedict the 16th. And when they told me that they would actually be able to make that happen, that was around my 3rd or 4th round of chemo, and that was something that I was able to look forward to going through the rounds. And every time I was feeling down, I could think forward to, hey, when I'm done with this, I'm going to get to go to Vatican City and meet the Pope. So,
and it finally happened.
I like to say that the chemotherapy helped me fight. Yes, it did. It happened in happened in May of 2012.
And tell me about that encounter.
Oh, it was truly incredible. I mean, I got to go 5 days in Rome. We had a few tours of the Vatican, walked through a bunch of different churches, and then when I actually went to meet the Holy Father, we had front row seats to my whole family had front row seats to his general audience he does once a week. Mm-hmm. And after he had finished speaking to the public, I got to go up and actually meet with him one-on-one and talk to him for a little bit.
And what happened there?
Well, I got up there and I told him a little bit about my story. I handed him a green rubber wristband, which one of my friends had made, that said, praying for Peter, Romans 8:28, which was the Bible verse that kind of inspired me. It's, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. And that had always inspired me through my entire battle. So I got up there and I handed Pope Benedict one of these wristbands, and I told him a little bit about my struggle and why that verse inspired me so. And then after that, he put his hand on my chest and he gave me a blessing.
Now, had you told him that that's where the tumor resided?
I had not, no.
Huh. And you attribute that as part of the healing in addition to, obviously, the chemo and the rounds of radiation?
Well, the actual blessing from Pope Benedict, I don't attribute to the healing quite as much. What I say is that the chemotherapy helped me fight the cancer, and then the Make-A-Wish helped me fight the chemo. Mm-hmm. But I believe that God had a huge part to play in my healing, along with the medical science that we have today. You see a lot of people think that it's either God or it's science. You can't have the both mixed together. Mm-hmm. And I completely disagree with that, and I think that God works through science and through doctors, through the research we have, and he helped cure me through all of that. And I mean, it's when the doctors are working, they're bringing glory to God and helping those people like me stay alive and keep on fighting.
Tell me quickly, Peter, how has this changed your faith? And I know it has effectively changed your life. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, the experience with the Eucharist in my hospital room really opened my eyes to I'd always had faith throughout my whole life, but that was a concrete moment where I truly saw God, and that has strengthened my faith remarkably. Meeting with Pope Benedict had the same effect of just an experience of faith that you get once in a lifetime. I've been planning on entering the seminary and becoming a priest for a while now. Before I actually got sick, I had started thinking about that. And both of these experiences has strengthened my resolve to discern and to truly find out God's will for me in my life.
Well, Peter Srsich, I thank you so much for being with us. It has been impressive and great to meet you, and thank you for sharing your story. And we will certainly follow your journey and wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, it is hard to believe that the world over has been on EWTN for 17 years. This month, we celebrate our 17th anniversary and enter our 18th season. Now, my cruel staff, James Faulkner and Chris Edwards, located footage from my very first appearance on EWTN just days after I was hired. It seems like only yesterday, though it sure doesn't look that way. This is Mother Angelica's show from the Paleolithic period, February 1996 and 1997. Take a look if you dare.
Now I'm going to let you, Raymond Arroyo. He's our new news director. And he just found an apartment today, he and his wife. So this is a new thing, but it'll take us not too long to start giving you a little news. Welcome to our family, Raymond.
Thank you for having me.
Let me tell you something funny about Raymond. You know, when he gets enthused, his voice is loud. You wouldn't need a microphone from here down to City Hall. And anyway, I said to him yesterday, we won't need a microphone with you there tomorrow night. And And he's so enthused, you know, and what happened? The Lord gave him laryngitis.
I think you had something to do with it.
We'll give our good commentator a good boost, and he's doing a good job. He's a great commentator. Him and I have some disagreements. We have some words at times. He doesn't get a chance to use his already.
Like now, you
like
see?
Now.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I love you anyway.
I love you too, anyway. So you asked for it.
I know. I gave you the setup.
See, I can tease you because I'm his boss.
Yeah.
Boy, I miss those times. I'm very thankful to my old boss for her trust and devotion through the years. She knows how much I love her. When I founded EWTN News in 1996, I made a vow to Mother that we would report the truth, no matter where it led, build up the culture, and around the edges, inspire you, the audience, with the stories we told. And we'd have a little fun doing it. Over these 17 years, I've attempted to do just that, and it's been quite a ride. I've been privileged to interview truly extraordinary people in religion, politics, science, and the arts. In my quest for the truth, I've always tried to ask the important questions with grace, even if my interviewees didn't always wish to entertain them. You are now planning on going to the Olympics. You just said earlier, freedom is a gift from the Almighty.
Yeah.
Considering the human rights record of that regime, how can you in good conscience go to that ceremony?
The reason why is because I can talk to them about religious freedom prior to the Olympics, during the Olympics, and after the Olympics, and which I have done. I don't need the Olympics to express my position to the Chinese leadership on freedom. I just don't need them, because that's all I have been doing as your president.
Well, Angela Merkel boycotted it.
I don't think she boycotted it necessarily.
Well, she's not attending the opening ceremonies, it appears.
She's not attending the games, period. She's not going to, I don't think she's going to Beijing at all. That's at least what she told me. But nobody needs to tell old George Bush that he needs to bring religious freedom to the doorstep of the Chinese, because I've done that now I'm on my 8th year doing it.
21 years in this post, and I've read in many reports you wanted to retire several times. Why are you still here?
Yes, I had decided to retire in 91, 96, 2001, because I have the idea I could write some books and return to my studies, as Cardinal Martini did.
Right.
So it was my idea to do the same thing. But from the other hand, seeing the suffering Pope, I cannot say to the Pope, I will retire, I will write my books.
Visuals tell a picture, sister. And when you open with the president saying, we can't wait for health care reform, and then you show a series of hundreds of people holding letters saying, I can't wait, and I can't wait, and I can't wait, that seems as if you're endorsing that particular plan, doesn't it?
We do support the president in his effort that health reform must come now for moral
Why must it come now, though, sister, if it's an imperfect plan and life is being targeted and the very people you seek to help, the poor, the uninsured, the immigrant, if those lives are going to be put in the line, the elderly immigrants, the unborn child who's poor, why would you support this rush when you're not certain of what plan and shape this plan will take?
Well, the lives of these people are being destroyed day in and day out for the lack of health care. Just look
Abortion on demand in the bill wouldn't be targeting unborn lives, sister?
The bill hasn't come up with abortion on demand yet.
All three of them have clauses that seem to indicate that they will be funded via HHS. There's no stops on them. There are no mandates to stop that coverage.
Raymond,
sister. So the life issues then are secondary to this overarching goal for universal care?
Raymond, you continue to try to distort that.
No.
Yeah,
I want you to go on the record because people are very unclear on that, sister. But are you willing to withdraw your support? Are you willing to threaten to withdraw your support unless these this abortion language is removed and the elders, the protection of the elderly is included in this bill?
We've already said clearly, unless our principles are met, we're not going to be supportive.
People haven't heard it, sister.
Well,
are you anti-Semitic?
Of course not. And if I was, I wouldn't have been working in this town with the people I've worked with for so many years, nor would they have wanted to work with me. I mean, it's ludicrous.
What do you make of their charge? But then they say, this movie could serve as a toxic recipe for religious hatred, could legitimize anti-Semitism. Will it?
No. This is rubbish. This is absolute rubbish. This film is about faith, hope, love, and forgiveness. That's what it's about.
Does this film attempt to collectively blame the death of Jesus on the Jewish people?
This film collectively blames humanity on the death of Jesus. Now, there are no exemptions there.
And I have to thank all of you, our world over family, for tuning in each week and for always being here for me and my guys. Your love and prayers have sustained us, and it's the real reason we are the longest running live show on EWTN today. I thank you. It's been an honor and mostly a joy. In the coming year, we're going to be bringing you some brand new segments and a few things you've never seen us do before, all that is seen and unseen, right? Our 17th anniversary celebration will continue next week, and we'll bring you some more memories. In the meantime, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, always on the left-hand side of the site. By the way, if you sign up for my free e-blast on RaymondArroyo.com, I'll send you some important stories I see throughout the week, previews of upcoming shows, and links to our YouTube postings of the show each week. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.